So what I was thinking about is sports as a way to God, or March Madness as a way to God. So how could sports or March Madness be a way to God? Really? How's that possible to do? Some might say that's crazy. How can sports, something... I've had people in given talks that I've given, the only thing that sports and spirituality have in common is they both begin with SP. I'm not kidding. People have said that to me because they're like, no way. But and basketball or sports, some people could say, would never lead us to God. And in some ways, I agree with that. You think of gambling, recruiting violations, the corruption, the steroids, the win-at-all-cost attitude, etc. All those things could lead us away from God and not draw one to God. You can make a case for that. I can understand that. Like when I'm teaching the sports and spirituality class, undergraduate, I usually ask them at the beginning of the class, how do these go together? And probably 60% of them say, I have no idea. I have no idea. That's why I'm in this class. And I understand that, but I think it's possible to do that. Absolutely. I could talk a whole other thing about this, but really what I want to talk about is competition. But I'm thinking March Madness, could that be a way to God? Is it really? I mean, does God care who wins that tournament? Yeah. As long as it's Villanova, we'll be all right. But no, I don't, no. But I think that God wants us to have fun. God wants us to see, say, the beauty of sports. And certainly I think 2 years ago, all the fun that came with that championship, the beauty of Arch's pass, and the beauty of Chris Jenkins' shot, I think beauty reveals God. You know, Augustine was really big on how beauty can reveal God's presence to us if we really appreciate it. And I think we can see beauty in sports, absolutely. So I think it can. And what I wanted to do initially is kind of draw out tradition. What does tradition say? A little bit. I don't want to go too long. And really the main thing that I want to get to is telling a story from my own life, which is going to connect with some of the stuff we were talking about. But in the Ignatian tradition, in the Ignatians, the founder of the Jesuits, his particular kind of spirituality said it's possible to see God in all things, not in some things, everything. Now, sports were not big in the 16th century, obviously, but I think, and one of my good friends that's in this whole sports and spirituality does a lot of writing. Pat Kelly teaches at Seattle. He's a Jesuit, and he's written loads of stuff on seeing the goodness of sports. So Ignatius, obviously there weren't sports or a low-level kind of sports at that time in the 16th century. I think if Ignatius were alive today, he could see God in sports, in everything. I think if you're really going to pay attention to what Ignatius is saying. Another person that I like is Thomas Keating, the Trappist, spiritual writer, and he says, every human pleasure is meant to be a stepping stone to know God better, or to discovering something new, some new aspect of God. Everything in the universe is meant to be a reminder of God's presence. Everything. Not just some things. And if you're going to take that seriously, you have to look at what sports can teach us. And I think it can, in a lot of different ways. as long as we don't get overly attached to wins and losses or to the glitter and the fame, I think we can allow sports to show us God if we know how to look. And that's key. And that's really is knowing what we're looking for. For those who know how to see, things can become apparent. And the last person I'm thinking of is the Pope, Pope Francis, who is a Jesuit. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think it's really, he's steeped in that Jesuit spirituality. And he recognized, so he had a conference 2 Octobers ago in Rome. Joe, you were at the one this past summer. Yep. But 2 Octobers ago, it was called Sports in the Service of Humanity. And he said, challenge yourself in faith as you challenge yourself in sports. And that conference identified 5 virtues that can be taught through sports. And I think actually there are more, but the ones that they identified were joy, respect, love, balance, and enlightenment. And so that's a little bit, there's a lot more there you could talk about, that I could talk about. So I think it's possible to see God in sports, to allow, and I want to say, it's possible to allow competition to usher us in to a deeper relationship with God. Now, so this is what I'm going to talk about now is what I wrote about in my dissertation. So at Duquesne, the way we wrote our dissertations, you took an experience from your life. It was a phenomenological approach. So people that were with me wrote on anger, trust, I forget what else some of the people wrote on, but mine was competition. And so what you did was you wrote about it, an actual experience, and then broke it apart. So what I wrote about was this. So I've told this story 500 times, at least. But every time I tell it, it's still embarrassing. Really. So in 1971, as Mark said, we went to the national championship. We lost to UCLA by 6. And we thought at that time that we were the best team in Villanova basketball history. So it's not just me. I was certainly, yes. And this is where we're going to get into envy, Jimson. So, and my teammates, we were pretty much, just because we thought, he's like, just because you thought it's actually true? Well, yeah, we did, no doubt. So in 1985, you guys know what happened in 1985. They win the national championship. So I'm there. So I was a priest at the time, so I'm celebrated the pregame mass. I coached with Rowley. I coached with some of those coaches that are on that team. So I'm actually the only person from our team that's there. So I'm getting into it on TV, radio, and what do you think about this team? How's it compared to your team? Da-da-da-da-da. And so what I was feeling, actually, I couldn't say. But I was rooting for Georgetown.
They're not quite as good as your team back then. No way.
Yeah, I was rooting for Georgetown. You get that, Jimson? Why?
You believe that your team was the best?
Right, and so if they win, you can't even talk about it anymore because 85 team won. They won the national championship. We didn't. But that was hard. That was hard for me to handle. I'm watching that game, with Father Stack is on one side and Father Mastardi is on the other side. And they know what's going on in me and everybody in the Villanova. When they come back, Villanova comes back in the second half, and they take the lead. everybody in the Villanova section standing up, going crazy. I'm sitting down. Oh no, I mean it. I was like, I don't know if I can. Now, for me, here's where, and I remember sitting down. I really do remember that because I was like, I really did. This is not magical. I don't mean it as magical. I really don't. But I remember sitting down when everybody's going crazy. And I'm like, I remember saying a prayer, saying, God, I can't handle this. I need some help in rooting for my own team because I'm helpless here. And then it wasn't magic. You know, probably, I would say, a couple minutes later, I could get up and root because these guys, I coached with some of these assistant coaches too. Not only Rolly. These are friends of mine. So why am I feeling this way? Talk about envy. And I was able to be happy for them at the end. And it wasn't magical. It really wasn't. Now, the really funny thing about this, I think it's funny anyway. So that was in 85. So I come back to Villanova in 91. It was in campus ministry and I was teaching. So I went down to Rolly's office. He was in the pavilion at the time. And I'll never forget, I went in the office and Jay's there. He's an assistant with him at the time. And so it was myself, Rolly, and Jay. And I went in and told Rolly that just what I just told you. He threw me out of the office. Oh, you should hear it.
He didn't beat you up.
Oh, Hastings, get out of this office right now. How could you? And Jay was like, Coach, try to calm down. He's just trying to be honest with you. And now, Jay and I still laugh at this. We do. But now, in fairness, if we're taping this, Rolly called me the next day and apologized. He did. But he threw me out. Now, it's funny that 2 years ago, we were walking from the church. I think we had gone to a mass. And then the men's basketball banquet, it must have been a mass before it. We walked to the banquet, and we just happened to run into Jay. And Jay came up to me, and he said, you know, I wonder if Rolly was rooting for us. What do you think?
I'm sure he was.
Joe.
Probably not. He told anybody that.
Well, I mean, that Jay asked me the question. Probably, I don't know if he was. Knowing Rolly, he probably wasn't, but he wasn't going to say anything. But listen. What I want to say there is that kind of competition envy, it hampered me so much that I felt almost helpless, and I needed help. The kind of, this is my team. How could I be rooting for Georgetown? I was more rooting. I wasn't really rooting for Georgetown. I was rooting against Villanova, but I needed help. And I realized that I couldn't do it on my own. See, that's where I want to say that competition showed me how I needed help. I needed some support. I wasn't going to be able to make it on my own. Anyway, so that's what I got. We can open it up for discussion.
Ed, let me ask you this. Is it your ability to transcend your envy in that one particular experience? Can you recall, you don't have to tell me, but can you recall times when you were never able to reconcile that in an athletic
Yeah, sure.
Whether it's high school or college or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, what's fascinating to me is the intra-team competition. In other words,
Sure.
so we're competing for the same spot, Joe, and now you won it. Now, how I'm a part of the team, we're playing St. Joe's, and you've got my spot. Can I root for the complicate? Exactly, because you got my spot. I want you to mess up so I can get my playing time. And that's very complicated. And how you deal with that. So And how do you deal with that dynamics on the team? And how do you get people to think beyond themselves? That's really, I think Jay does a good job with that. And not just Jay, good coaches, that's right. And it's not easy to do that. Jay, so are there times when I was not able? Absolutely. Oh, yeah, for sure. And it goes beyond sports, too. You know, I wanted to go out with this girl, and somebody else goes out with her. Now, that competition, you know, you can see where that goes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I asked you, and I was having this conversation with my kids today. I told both my sons I was coming here, and then I was saying how, because candidly, I don't know what God's place is in sports. Because I feel like, and I said this to you before, like why is it that you never hear the losing quarterback
Yeah.
say, I want
Yeah.
to thank the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Give me this opportunity.
Yeah.
So you're now, the only platform ever mentioned is the victors.
Yeah. No, there's...
Now, this is new insight because I think the hardship of competition and the frailty of our makeup is such that when we can transcend the pettiness, the BS, the weakness, then something great can happen in the form of a team, definitely. Much like the Eagles. I mean, I look at
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I genuinely feel like, you know, Wentz was happy for Foles.
I think he was. I was watching that. Or how about the national championship football?
Yeah.
You know, with Hertz and the guy that came in. I was watching that because that's fascinating to me.
Absolutely.
Fascinating. And
Like you said, the culture that somebody's creating.
yes.
You know, like that's not happening. His parents are a big part of his family's upbringing, but like that was remarkable.
Oh, that was amazing. But, you know, back on that. So I think, I would say, I really think there aren't many absolutely definite things I can say. But here's one of them. I never went into a game wanting to lose or being content with losing. I know, and like football, basketball, baseball, I think I could say, I never. On the other hand, I know I've learned more from losing than from winning. I know that. Times that I messed up, you know, times I dribbled the ball. We're playing BC up at Boston in their gym, and it's a tie score. We call a timeout. We set a play to my roommate, my brother-in-law, and everybody I come out, I'm at half court. Everybody on the team, both teams, the other 8 guys are on the other side. They know where the ball's going, so I go down left. All I got to do is lay the ball up. I beat the guy. All I got to do is lay it up, and we win. And there's like 2 seconds to go. I dribbled the ball off my foot, out of bounds. I never did that. I don't. That's the only time I ever did it, even in playground. But I did it. And so we come back, and everybody's like, "Why didn't you run the play? Why didn't you?" Like my brother-in-law, "Why didn't you?" I'm like, "How do you explain it?" Everybody's on that side of the court, but I dribbled the ball off my foot, and I can still remember that. Like, I could go through details of that. But I think it's. If I can approach it with some perspective, it can be humbling in a good sense. Not beating up on myself, but hey, you can't do everything. And you're going to mess up sometimes. You're going to fail. And what do you do with that? And I think, and I know I got 15 more of those stories.
Sure.
And those tend to, when we mess up, those things tend to stick more than the positive stuff. And why is that, you know?
I think maybe a way to think about sports as a conduit for the divine, because I think if you scratch my surface underneath, I'm a filthy Thomist, right? So I typically ask questions that a filthy Thomist is going to ask.
And so what does that mean?
Well, it means, okay, in this context, what it means. Last semester, I was doing my PhD seminar on evolutionary psychology, natural and behavioral economics. The idea was to take this idea of nature, that we're constituted in a particular way, and to figure out how different disciplines are dealing with that, right? Typically in theology, we're about 20 years behind most of the other disciplines, right? And so we're playing catch-up. But I used Thomas as a port of entry to start thinking about us as creatures that are constituted by a nature, right? that God instituted certain drives and desires in us, right? And I would want to interpret those from the perspective of, let's say, a Darwinian notion of biological evolution. But, okay, so the question that I was always asking to my students was, what's the good to be sought in this particular institution, pattern of activity, in the way in which you're directed, right? Because those internal directions are, according to Thomas, from God, right? They're implanted in us by God. So what are the good? And the good, so let me articulate a couple goods of athletic competition. I'm going to use my son as an example because I think he vividly illustrates one of the goods. And so we've talked about my son before, right? And my son is a highly competitive baseball player. He's got just a ridiculous amount of natural athletic talent. He's been playing highly competitive baseball for about 6 or 7 years. And every time one of his seasons ends with any team, he cries like a baby, right?
First time this happened is really disarming because I thought maybe somebody had molested him or someone's like, hey, what's going on, buddy? He said, oh my God, I'm gonna miss my friends so much, right?
Yeah.
And he needs to cry because what happens over the course of a season is there's the bonding process, right? And there's the working together and there's a coming together as a unit bigger than your own good, right?
Yep.
And so you contribute to the bigger good, you learn how to work within that bigger good, you get to know personalities, how they function, their strengths, their weaknesses. You create the most formidable team you can, and you're off to the races, right? In a way, it's kind of like, I think, a lot of the bonding that goes along in the military, and a lot of the bonding that you see, like in ancient hunter-gatherer societies, right? Where you're off hunting the big animals.
And you need one another.
There's a visceral, emotional connectedness to your teammates. And so what's interesting is that Thomas would talk about like a natural happiness or natural beatitude, right? That we are geared by God to be happy human beings, to be flourishing human beings who try to promote our well-being. And one of the ways in which we do that is we become bonded with other people in a very deep and substantial way. And I think outside of a lot of intimate relationships, the place where most of us experience that most intensely is during athletic competition and the bonds that we actually forge during athletic competition. It's not simply athletic, it's not the competition where you start locking horns with a distinct other, right, another team. But I also remember when I was a kid growing up, and when you grew up in rural Iowa, you either play with cows or you play sports, one of the two. So you end up spending most of your time playing sports. And all the hours you spend throwing a baseball, shooting hoops with the neighbor kids, right? What do you do? You're bonding with them, right? And you're building up relationships. And what's funny is when you were talking about your story about not wanting to root for Villanova in 1985, my initial thought was, wow, this is where competition gets derailed.
Yeah.
Because usually competition is going to bring people together, right? And create these bonds of friendship and solidarity. But there you are, isolating yourself, right?
Yep.
Because you cannot root for your team anymore.
That's right.
And so that seems to me, that's where the good gets derailed. You're no longer seeking the good, right? The good of the pack or the good of your team.
It's what I think is
You're just the good for yourself,
Right,
right? And so
right.
there's a deprivation of the good that's usually inherent in that particular activity, which is a spirit of camaraderie, helping each other out, rooting for one another, forming those bonds that transcend kind of the moment, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good way to think about sports, insofar as you want to think about sports as a component of human well-being or human flourishing.
Sure.
I think they're larger goods myself. But in terms of, allowing for humans to live happy, fully flourishing lives, I think sports are great.
Yeah, I mean, you can think back to Jackie Robinson and what that did
Oh,
for
yeah.
race relations.
Oh yeah.
And remember the Titans or a movie
Oh,
like
yeah.
that, and where it transcends all of it.
Mhm.
One of my favorite lines when I pray in the morning is, "Save me from my sinfulness." Lord, just because I'm sinful by nature, and I find myself in sports, and I said, I talked to Ed about this, like, I truly believe sports bring out the worst in people, not the best in people. Or, I should say that, I believe the propensity to bring out the worst in people is as prevalent as it is the best in people. And I'm very, when it comes to me and my involvement in athletics, I have a closet spirituality because I don't ever want to be in a situation where I'm at my worst and I'm viewed like that, and then in the context of another environment, I'm quote unquote a good guy, faith-based,
Yeah.
whether it's at church or in a group or, so it's a bit of a dichotomy for me, because I never want to be, you know, whether it's publicly praying the Our Father, that bothers me. I don't know why that bothers me.
It's the Catholic thing as opposed to the Protestant thing. So, you know, I think we're not public with our.
No, but I think too, like I'm the first person to point out fraud if I see one. You know what I mean? So which is the Irish Catholic in me.
Yeah.
You know, where I'm projecting some of that stuff on other people.
Yeah.
But you know, I would laugh when when I was the head coach of Millersville, there was like 2 coaches in our league that they would always do the Our Father in the end zone. And I was like, you're a total fraud because you're going to shoot your butt off and, you know, whatever. But, and I always felt that there was a rub there with me. And I never wanted to be, that was, as flawed as I am, I never wanted to be viewed as like this, just this hypocrite. You know, so I'm trying to reconcile that, and then we get to the notion, like, let me ask you this, if you found out tomorrow that Chris Jenkins got $25,000 to come to Villanova from Nike, how would that change your view of that team? Like, let's just say hypothetically, and that's not happening.
It would
I'm not
prove that
saying-
the 1971 team was better.
we were
vindicated.
We were ESPN, feel good, top story of the year. Like, what would happen?
Well, you know,
Hypothetically.
you know,
Like, how would you feel about that team? Would it, and I know you had a similar experience with as a player, with one of your
Porter.
teammates. Yeah.
Yeah, Porter had it. Yeah, there was a scandal involved. And we had to give our money back.
Yeah. So.
And
I'm
then-
not talking about that. I'm just talking about as a not as a fan, as somebody that's going over basketball families. Like, would you feel differently about it? By no means, that never happened. I'm not saying that did. I'm just using that as an example.
Yeah, but
with the recent-
you know, I'm trying to. So like in '85, I don't know if you the Gary McLean thing.
Yeah.
Do you remember
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
I mean, that's so. We've had examples. So when we went to the national championship, you probably don't remember this. Porter, our star player, was involved in a scandal. He was taking money early. It was a competition for the ABA and the NBA. And so we had to hand back all our money because he had accepted money before the end of the season, so we were technically playing with a pro as opposed to an amateur. And then '85, McLean was taking cocaine during some of those games, and that came out later. It's a big Sports Illustrated article. So going back to your point, I'd like to say no, that I would be, but I'm not sure that I would because I know, and we're on tape here, and so I'm holding off a little bit.
I probably shouldn't say, now I feel awkward for you.
No. But because there's other stuff, not about that team, about our team.
Yeah. I mean, that was such a fun team to watch, and I just feel like
most recent.
Archie,
Oh yeah, it was great.
They were awesome.
Mhm.
There was no disease of me. It was very.
Yeah.
That's one of the neat characteristics of Villanova basketball
Absolutely.
recently.
Yeah.
Is that the selfish component has been completely evacuated.
Well,
when
it's
you
true.
watch it play,
It's true.
everyone
I don't know how
on
Jay
the
does
court
that.
is always going to make the extra pass if it's going to lead to a more open shot. I think.
No
They have
question.
developed a culture which is so hard to
Unbelievable.
establish.
In that sport,
Yes.
because of the AAU culture.
Yeah.
That where those kids are
Coming
anointed
from?
when they're
Yep.
13 years old,
That's
and it's about getting my touches and
Oh,
all
yeah.
that, and he's done an unbelievable.
And he had trouble in the beginning. When he first came, was it around 2000? He had trouble in the beginning, and actually there was a telephone problem. Wasn't it some telephone number stuff? I forget what it was.
I remember that.
Yeah. So, in other words, it takes time to establish that culture. And then I think what he has now, which I think is the best thing, is you got the older kids telling the younger kids. Not him. He's doing it. You got so they have the culture established where you have the players themselves emulating what's going on, and then talking to the younger players and telling them. You watch when somebody has a foul, they're clapping. You notice that?
Yeah.
And they do that intentionally. Or if somebody's on the floor, everybody runs to them and picks them up.
It's part of the fabric.
It's all about that, and it's all those little things when they come out of that timeout. And I think other people do it too. They're all the way down to Father Rob. They're slapping everybody's hands. I think other people do that too.
Listen to the press conferences after the game.
Yeah,
I mean, it's always in there. It's about my teammates. It's about.
it's true. I mean,
So-
Phil Booth. It's about the brotherhood. He said it the other day. You know, when he wasn't playing, what he missed more than anything is the brotherhood of those guys playing.
Given your research thus far, is there anything that you would like to add in terms of, sports as a port of entry to the
Yeah, I mean, I think John Paul was huge. He was really one of the earlier popes to come out and be pro-athletic. And,
Right.
not just the appreciation for the talent and the athleticism, but kind of your ability to just transcend failure and hardship and some of that. So that was kind of cool, and being a part of that that seminar we had last summer was pretty cool.
Yeah.
But it's where does the and I would ask you this, Mark, where does the 15-year-old ultra competitive baseball player who's not dealing with agents or not dealing with the NCAA or grade fabrication or any of that stuff, like that's when does sports sports for the sake of competition become different, become the other.
Yeah.
And I mean, you could argue. I mean, not Villanova football, but certainly Michigan football. Michigan State basketball. Like, there's a corporate nature to that. We were just talking before they get seats, get people in the seats, getting them to spend this amount of money. And then you laugh all the time with coaches because so-and-so had a 98% graduation rate, but he got fired because he didn't win enough games. And then sometimes the guys like the shyster, the snake oil salesman, gets a job 2 minutes after he gets fired. So
Happens all the time.
yeah, but again, it's there's an ugliness to the fan base too,
Yeah, that's true.
because there's people in Alabama that don't care what the graduation rate is.
Right.
They're
They just want
willing
to
to
win.
spend
They just want to win.
$350 for a ticket
Yep.
and win a national championship.
Yeah.
And then you and I talked a little bit about the academic component. There's challenges within that too.
Oh yeah.
I have a couple of questions, but
Yeah.
I feel like that was a question addressed to you, but I can wait.
Up right in.
Okay. My questions are shifting in a different vein. This is probably two of them. The first question is what kind of a perspective or a mindset, in terms of spirituality, do you maybe embody or would you recommend in terms of having that team-orientedness that you see perhaps in athleticism?
So how do you do that?
How do you do that? Like, what is that? Because it seems like from what you said, it was a prayer. And
Yeah.
yeah, and great. Like I'm thankful for that.
Right.
But at the same time, like, what are some things one could employ on their own, or like what practices engender that?
I'm just one. I think as I listen to, not to say I want to put it all onto Jay, because I don't want to be Saint Jay, but I think he's not the only one that does it. But I think one of the things he does is assign everybody roles. Everybody's got and nobody's role is more important than the other. So that Chris Jenkins made the winning shot, but the other guys on the team, including the managers or the walk-ons on the bench, they intentionally build into the system. For example, I think Jay has the perspective, like Rob Hagan tells the story of not losing perspective. Like, so after they won the national championship, when they're getting on the bus to go to the airport to come home, have you heard the story?
No, yeah.
So Jay gets on the bus with them and says something like this: "Hey, it is wonderful that we just won this national championship, but don't think you're anybody different now that you won it," and he's talking to everybody, "than you were before the start of the season, before you played in this game." It's like to constantly reinforce that your identity is not in winning. It's more, so I would say to look at it spiritually, our identity is more grounded than determined by winning and losing. So, now Jay's not saying that. No, and I listen. I use Phil Jackson a lot, and he'll do the same sort of thing. It's getting the players to think of something beyond themselves, the team, rather than just me. And everything they do, from meditation to reading books together. This is Phil Jackson with the Lakers, the best players of all time, I think. With Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe and Michael Jordan with the Bulls, and he was coaching them, and he was doing the same stuff. It was giving them perspective. It's not just about, like, Michael Jordan was leading the league in scoring, but he never won a championship until Phil Jackson got there. And I think it was, Michael, you can't be lead the league in scoring anymore if you want to win. You got to share the ball. So it's something, getting them to think beyond themselves. And how you do that is, I think you got to just structure, and everybody's important, not just the one that's scoring points. You guys have anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's he's an ultimate communicator too. Because there's almost a methodical nature to his approach. After a win, he deflects to the walk-ons to prepare for practice.
Yep.
He's talking about, like, when he tweets, I'm not kidding, half his tweets are managers.
Is that right? I believe it. I haven't seen it.
It's like, they have you're at a hotel and you're having a walkthrough, and it's a room with carpet. There's going into the Big East, the managers were taping out a lane. An old time, probably an inbounds play, and it was white tape, the athletic tape, and then he's like, look at these managers, we're the best managers in the world.
Yeah.
This is the night before the Big East championship game, and he's talking about the managers. So it's bottom up leadership. And he's a real deal. One of the most impressive things, and this has nothing to do with spirituality, but never forget this as long as I live. So they won the national championship. School's off, they went in on Monday night. They're off on Tuesday. The school's closed. So I do my fat man jog around campus every day at noon. And, now it's Wednesday. So it's less than 48 hours. And I see Jalen Brunson with a book bag. It's 12:15, 12:30. He's got a book bag, and he's walking into an academic building. Right? And I'm like, that's not happening in Kentucky. Now, that has nothing to do with, but in terms of the culture, and the older I get, the more I appreciate. I think we kind of come up appreciating people that can handle failure and adversity.
Yeah.
But the older I get, the more I appreciate people that can handle success.
Sometimes it's
With
harder.
that hubris, absolutely.
It's true.
And to stay grounded and humble. I think there's a natural inclination to be humbled when you get life's kicking
Right.
you in the face.
Right.
But when you have, even the way he handled it with the shot, it was like there was such a professional,
Yeah, it's true.
not a detachment, but almost like, for him, it's about the process. He's processed. Everything about his culture is about the process and the journey.
Yeah.
You never talk about the win. You never hear him talk about the wins. And I think that's the journey of Christianity too.
I think you're right.
It's like it's not, this is the day the Lord made. Let us rejoice and be glad. We're not talking about on my deathbed if I'm, gonna make it through the gates or whatever. But this is like, like you were saying earlier, like to be, hey man, we're meant to enjoy this, and this is, and I always, in football it's worse because you only have 11 games.
Yeah.
We play fewer competitions than anybody else, any other athlete on campus, and we think we work just as hard as every athlete. So, like the day to day, you have to enjoy the process, the locker room, you know, the talking a kid out of quitting, or just kind of commiserating and complaining about your coach or someone, you know, all the things, the intensity of the emotions. I'm not sure where I'm going with that, but just.
Well, I think perspective is so important.
Yeah.
And sometimes, and here's my 2 cents, and I'm not casting aspersion at, let's say, upper level athletics in the United States, right? But think about Villanova football, right? We're very fortunate to have good football. If you go to the Indian diaspora, right, they're not going to have organized athletics at that level, is my guess, right? So we kind of live in this sports bubble in the United States because of our relative affluence and our ability to pay at least top-notch athletes just exorbitant sums of money, so that they start, you know, at Villanova football, then they go to the NFL, and they make their mark, so on and so forth, right? And the problem with thinking about sports in terms of the top athletes and trying to make sense of that is the fact that the further you progress in athletics, the fewer the numbers are, right? So you get down to the handful of major athletes in each sport, right? And I think to a certain extent it tends to marginalize what's really good about sports. And I think if you want to think about like a spirituality or a theology sports, what you have to do is you have to not only think about the Michael Jordans, right? But you have to think about 8th grade junior high basketball teams, right? Because you get far more people participating competitively in those levels, right, of athletic competition than you do with the Chicago Bulls, for example, right? And furthermore, when you're dealing with low-level athletic competition, you're not dealing with the infiltration of money and corporate influence and NCAA regulations, which can be draconian. So you don't have a lot of the external influences. You have kids there who want to be athletic and participate on a team.
And be with their friends and have
be
fun.
with their friends, right?
Yep.
So I honestly think that if you want to generate a spirituality or theology of athletic competition, you got to think about those 8th grade basketball teams, right? Because they're out there not for the money, right? Not for the fame and glory, but for other reasons. And I think those other reasons are essentially going to give some kind of fodder for thought for millions and millions of people who participate in athletics, whether they're organized or just spur of the moment playing racquetball with a friend, right? If you can do that, you can speak to virtually millions and millions of people.
But is it limited to that? I mean, can you have spirituality in professional athletes? I mean, I think it's easier to do it. I agree with you in 8th grade.
Well, let me ask you this. Okay, what do you make of the Eagles? Like the whole, you know, there was definitely a Christian slant on that whole. I don't know if you saw it, but the baptism at the
Jensen,
hotel. The baptism at the hotel one night. Did you see that? And now, is it scary that we're now associating the Super Bowl win with a newfound Christian faith?
I think
That's kind of meritocracy. You know, if you
God's room for the Christians. Let's go.
Well, if you pray more than and you're good, you'll get what you want. I don't think we ever want to say that.
No, but I think it's a slippery slope.
Oh, absolutely. Yep, it is.
And part of me is like, man, that is so awesome. And then the other part of me is like, you know what, this is just gonna, it's like, you know,
Do you know what? It's easy to make those connections because when you're on a winning path and you've just accomplished athletic perfection, right, within your particular sport, it's easy to feel so good about yourself that there has to be the divine hand, right?
No.
In some way, shape, and form. Right?
Well, what about the other team? What about the Patriots?
Sure, right. But see, the problem is then you start tying religiosity into winning, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
And that's where I think the corruption starts.
Yes, I agree.
Right?
Yes.
Because if you don't win, then all of a sudden maybe it's God not on your side.
Right.
Because it's not a spiritual
I don't think we
experience.
ever.
That's why you got to get back to the 8th grade basketball team.
Well,
I
but
wouldn't argue with that.
no, I wouldn't either. But what I would say is it possible to talk about spirituality, theology with professional athletes. I think it's more difficult there.
Again, I come back to this, and this has been a cross that I'm bearing for the last, it's really in the last, I would say, 10 years. Because I've kind of, my self-awareness has kind of grown, and I see myself kind of for who I am. I just have, it comes down to this for me. I'm a sinful person, okay?
That's
And
right.
when I can overcome my sinfulness, jealousy that a buddy of mine just won a national championship, and I'm gonna 60. You know, when I got fired at Rhode Island, I harbored a ton of like,
Yeah.
you know,
no,
just bad feeling.
got it.
Yeah, and I was as petty and as jealous as anybody. And
Right.
I love these guys that were having success. Dave Clawson was the head coach at Wake Forest. I was with him for, you know, a little while. We met here, he's the head coach. And I found myself just being so small-minded.
Yeah.
But I do think, like, the hardship that comes with loss and defeat and it being so public, you know, like I say, that, you know, when somebody, you know, some fan or some parent yell something to me, like, Trader, you suck. You know, I'm like, dude, you know, what if I came into your law office on Monday after you lost the case and said, you know,
That's
you
right.
suck.
After a bad lecture in
Yeah.
class, Greg,
Right, right.
So it's like, now I laugh, but 10 years ago I would have laughed.
Right.
Get over here! But, so, for me, and I've really kind of, this has been, I talked to you a little bit the other day, about it, because it's just, it's a labor of love for me. And I think the hardship and the humility that comes with sport has given me a platform to overcome my sinfulness. And that, it's seeing beauty everywhere,
Mm-hmm.
and seeing, dealing with loss and pain.
I'm gonna close the door and lock it. Do you have a wild card to get in?
Ooh, to this one?
If you don't, I'll just leave it open.
I don't know that it will.
I'll just leave it open, that's fine. You come
Okay.
back to your tab whenever you want.
I got
And
five.
I think all that stuff that you've been through is a part of the journey.
Yeah, no doubt.
It's the Christian journey, whether you're playing football or
Absolutely.
you're a lawyer.
Definitely. Did you ever, the best sports book I've ever read, I don't know if you've heard of it, My Losing Season by
Oh, absolutely. Yes,
It's
great.
like- it has an unintended spirituality.
Oh, I love that
Did you ever
book.
hear
I
that?
love Pat Conroy.
Oh, I read everything. He's
Me too.
Yeah, South America, even the
And,
non-sports stuff.
and he was an athlete. He
Yeah.
played at the Citadel
Yeah.
anyway.
Did you ever hear him? He wrote The Great Santini,
Oh, okay,
but
right.
he
Um,
was a basketball player at the
Citadel. Yeah.
5'10", white point guard. Dad was the Great Santini. They say it's autobiographical.
It is. It is. It is.
Dad was a good athlete at West Point. You'll never make it. You'll never be as good as your old man.
Mhm.
But basically, the book is about, you know, while the romance novel has you going undefeated, getting the cute girl, and living happily ever after, like, that's not life.
Right.
Yeah.
Life is getting fired, burying a loved one,
That's right.
Sure.
dealing with loss, and transcending all that, and still coming, you know, putting your feet on the ground every day, and coming back. And my you know, just talking about Jay, like, I have really, like you're probably able to see sides of him, you know, and get exposure that
Yeah.
maybe an average fan may
Right.
not. But, like, I'm so